you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Joins the Batman? Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Can I be a hero? Pro heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten without powers. So can you be a hero? Not without a quirk. Izukumidoriya's heart sank into his stomach. His knees were weak and he felt sick. His world was crashing down around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The shrunken, sickly visage before him had shattered for him the image of the symbol of peace that he worshipped and idolized for so long. And worst of all, that same hero, Izuku's hero since childhood, had confirmed his worst fear of all, that his dream, to become a pro hero, will never come true. "I see," was all Izuku managed to say. His voice felt as if it wasn't his own. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had imagined this scenario so many times, had imagined his hero telling him differently, that no matter what anyone else, Kaken, his classmates, anyone, said to him, that he could still become a hero. But in the end, it was all a fantasy. The frail All Might hoisted himself off of the ground and began to walk towards the stairwell that led from the roof where they stood and into the building. Seeing the distraught look on the boy's face, All Might made an attempt to comfort him. "If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it," he said. "You could become a police officer. They get crap because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession." All Might stopped at the door. "It's not bad to have a dream, young man," he said. "Just make sure your dreams are attainable, realistic, understand." And with that, he left, Izuku still standing in the same spot, unable to move, unable to even breathe. In his mind, his life seemed to flash before him, every image the same. The doctor who callously told him his quirk would never come. Kaken's continuous bullying for being quirkless, his classmates flaunting their powers to him, and lastly, his mother, his sweet, loving mother, blaming herself for the death of his dreams. Finally, Izuku's knees gave out beneath him. The cement of the rooftop felt cold as he fell in a heap atop it. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. He had never wanted anything more in his life, yet fate cruelly snatched it from him. All his work, all his hopes, all his dreams, gone in an instant. Deku tried to pick himself up off the rooftop. He knew he had to be home soon, but he couldn't move. He couldn't stop the tears as they flowed freely down his face. He didn't know how long he was there on that roof, but it felt like an eternity. The words of his hero echoed in his mind, over and over again. Can you be a hero? Not without a quirk. In an office building a few miles away, a handsome man, appearing to be in his late 40s, sat in a lavish office behind a large mahogany desk and laptop computer. On the computer screen, he was watching the scene on the rooftop between the hero All Might and the young boy he rescued. He had an aerial drone trained on the symbol of peace and had it tracking him for some time now. Normally, he was very difficult to follow. He was very fast, despite his bulky frame. But today, the drone had managed to spot him going after a sludge monster wreaking havoc in the city. Though it had lost him for a minute as the chase led into the sewer system, the drone caught up with him in time to catch footage of him rescuing a young boy from the clutches of the monster. After bringing him around, he leaped away, but the boy was still clinging to him. After a brief struggle, they descended and landed on a rooftop. The audio receptors on the drone managed to pick up their conversation. The boy wanted to become a hero, even though he did not have any powers. What happened next was a surprise to both the boy and the man watching. The symbol of peace literally deflated from his hulking, massive figure into a frail and sickly man. The man watching the feed had learned of the hero's injuries during a secret fight 5 years ago. This immediately piqued the man's interest, but he would have to investigate this at a later time. Finally, All Might answered the boy's question, "Can you become a hero? Not without a quirk." This answer visibly rattled the boy, and the man watching could almost feel the pain and sadness that he must have been feeling. All Might had picked himself up and left through the rooftop door. The boy collapsed to his knees on the rooftop, sobbing, and remained there for a while before leaving himself. The man scratched his chin, considering the young man. To see the boy's world taken from him, and to be unable to do anything about it reminded the man of a time long ago. But he then noticed something else. He backed up and augmented the feed, zooming in on All Might's pocket. The bottle that All Might had stuffed the sludge monster into was gone. He reversed the footage and managed to see the bottle dropping from All Might's pocket as he soared through the sky with the boy. This could be bad. The man tapped on a button that was hidden under his desk. The wall behind him parted, revealing a small opening. The man disappeared through the opening, the wall closing behind him. The fire blazed in the street as the heroes and emergency teams fought to keep the situation contained. They couldn't get close to it, and what's worse is that his quirk made it too fluid and slippery to lay hands upon it. And worse than that, he had taken a hostage. Explosions erupted from inside the monster, having little to no effect on it. The boy was trying to free himself, but the monster was too strong. The heroes were too afraid for the boy's safety to get too close, and others were physically unable to approach. The situation was bad, and they did not know how much longer the boy could last. The fire steadily grew worse. Thunder seemed to roll across the sky above the heroes. It seemed to get louder by the minute. "Look," shouted a civilian, pointing toward the sky. The heroes looked up to realize that it wasn't thundering at all, but a small, jet-black aircraft quickly approaching. "What is that?" shouted the hero Death Arms. "Is it one of ours?" "I don't know, Kamui Woods," the arbor hero shouted back. "I've never seen it before." A projectile was shot out of the aircraft toward the monster and its hostage. Startled, the creature attempted to swat it away, but it became lodged inside the appendage it had used. As quickly as it had come, the projectile exploded into ice, which continued to creep throughout the villain, who began to panic. "What the hell is happening?" it shouted, trying to break the ice. But when it touched the ice with another of its appendages, ice began to form on it as well. Another shot rang out as a large wire buried itself deeply into the creature, grasping onto the boy and ripping him from the monster's grasp. The creature roared as his hostage was torn from him and tried to retrieve him. But the ice continued to spread at a rapid pace. The creature knew it would soon be encased in the ice and decided to cut its losses. Separating itself from its frozen portion, it slithered away at a rapid pace, finally disappearing into an open manhole. "What was that?" Death Arms said incredulously. As if in answer to his question, a dark figure began to walk towards them. It was a tall, muscular man. He was dressed in a thick, dark gray suit with a black cape torn at the base billowing behind him, and a large bat-like symbol across his chest. His cowl obscured most of his face and had large points on the sides of the mask. He carried the boy in his arms as he walked past the heroes towards the ambulance standing by. He placed the boy on the stretcher and watched as the EMTs tried to revive the boy. But even as he laid him down, the man knew that it was already too late. The heroes had waited too long to rescue the boy. Finally, the EMT listened to the boy's heartbeat. After a minute or so, he shook his head. The heroes looked in horror as they draped a sheet over the boy's lifeless body. The monster had encased him in itself, and too much sludge had been ingested and inhaled by the boy. He was gone. One of the heroes began to approach the man in black, but before he could, he lifted his arm straight into the air and shot a cable from a small, gun-like device, lifting him up towards the small plane that was passing overhead. And as quickly as he came, he was gone. In the crowd, a tall, frail-looking man with dark shadows under his eyes began to tremble, grasping his side as blood began to seep from his mouth. He knew the boy was dead, and he knew that it was his fault. His rookie mistake had cost the life of a young man, and he was to blame. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned and walked away, his head hanging in regret. Izuku had returned to school the day following his encounter with All Might. He had been so depressed that he couldn't remember how long he had stayed on that rooftop before he wandered home and went to bed. It seemed like minutes, but it could have been hours. He had never been so lost in all his life. But in the end, he knew he could no longer deny what he had always known in his heart. He would never be a hero. It was time to set his sights on other avenues. Perhaps he could still go to UA, just in their general studies program. But the thought of going to UA and watching other students become heroes while he didn't put a knot in his stomach. He knew he would have to decide soon. But he had wanted to be a hero for so long, he was at a complete loss for what to do next. He didn't think anyone could get as low as he was feeling right now. But then Izuku got to class. The classroom was solemn. There was a picture of Kaken on the desk, and a black ribbon was tied around the corner of the frame. Izuku went numb and looked at Kaken's desk. It was empty. Their teacher was sitting at his desk, and Izuku approached him. "Sensei," he said, panicking. "What happened? Where's Kaken?" The teacher looked at him, stunned. "You don't know? It was all over the news last night." "What was?" Izuku said in a frightened tone. The teacher's eyes widened. He really didn't know. He took Izuku out into the hallway, where they can be alone. "I understand Bakugou was your childhood friend," the teacher said. "So, this makes it difficult for me to tell you this. Bakugou passed away last night." The words hit Izuku like a freight train. He felt distant from himself, standing in the hallway with his teacher as if he was viewing the situation from a distance. He didn't know what to think. he and Kaken weren't really friends anymore. Over the years, the rift between them grew wider as Kachen's quirk grew, and Izuku stayed put. But despite his constant bullying, Izuku still admired him and had always hoped one day that their friendship could be rekindled. But now that would never happen. He was gone, just like that. How? Izuku said, his voice barely a squeaky whisper. How did it happen? He was killed by a villain, said the teacher. Some kind of sludge monster. Izuku's face snapped up, his eyes meeting the teacher's. What did you say? The teacher looked at him with surprise. I said that he was killed by a sludge monster. The teacher repeated. Izuku's breath stalled in his lungs. He felt dizzy, sick to his stomach. He held his hand to the wall to steady himself. The teacher reached out his hand to steady him. Easy, Midoriya, what's wrong? I have to go, said Izuku quietly. What? Said the teacher. But class hasn't even started. I have to go. Izuku flew past his teacher, running down the hall before the teacher could stop him. Izuku didn't know where he was going. He just had to run. It was his fault. It was all his fault, and Kaken died for it. Izuku somehow found himself outside, and he just kept running. Down the street, into a neighborhood, past some shops. He just kept running. Tears streamed down his face as he ran, causing the wind on his face to sting with cold. All Might was right. He was no hero. He had gotten his best friend killed. How could he even think he could be a hero when Izuku stopped abruptly. He thought he had heard something loud enough to shake him from his haze. Someone was shouting. It was close, very close. Without thinking, he ran towards the source of the noise. There was a burly man who had cornered a young woman, no older than Izuku himself. She had brown, short hair above her shoulders, with only her bangs at her face extending longer. Her face was round, with full cheeks that seemed to perpetually blush. The burly man was approaching her. She was frightened, but she stood her ground. Stay back, she shouted, extending her hand. I'm warning you. Hey, kid, said the man. I'm just looking for a handout. You look like you could spare some. Maybe there's something else you can do for me as well. The man licked his lips, causing a chill to run down Izuku's spine. He advanced upon the girl, grabbing her by the wrist. Izuku acted. Without thinking, his legs seemingly moving by themselves, he ran towards the girl and her attacker. Hey, creep, leave her alone, he shouted, with more bravery than he actually felt. The attacker looked in Izuku's direction, and before he had time to react, Izuku had hurled his backpack towards him, striking him hard in the face. The man howled with pain, releasing the girl. Turning towards Izuku, the man activated his quirk, the nails on his fingers growing into sharp, steel-like knives. Shit was all Izuku could think. What do I do now? Despite the fear he felt, he stood his ground, his legs shaking in his shoes. I mean it. Leave her alone if you know what's good for you. Bratty kids, snarled the knife man. You need to learn your place. He began to advance on Izuku, who lifted his skinny arms to fight, well aware that he had no chance of victory. But the knife man began to float. Hey, what's going on? The knife man yelped, flailing as he ascended higher into the air. Behind him was the girl he had attacked. She seemed to be straining, one hand over her mouth, the other extended outwards. Whoa, thought Izuku. She can make things float. That's so cool. Immediately, he started to catalog this in his mind and instinctively reached for his notebook, but realized it was on the ground in front of him. He simply watched as the knife man flailed and screamed as they climbed higher and higher into the air. Finally, the girl put her fingertips together. Release, she said. The attacker plummeted to the ground, landing squarely on his head, unconscious. Izuku was about to congratulate the girl when he noticed her turn away from him, clutching her mouth. An instant later, she vomited all over the ground. Shaking, Izuku approached her. Are you okay? He said. The girl wiped her mouth, smiling weakly. Yeah, I'm fine, she said. I just get nauseous if I use my quirk too much. Her eyes widened as she realized. Thank you for helping me. Izuku felt his face flush bright red. He had never really talked to a girl, much less rescue one. It's nothing, he stammered. I honestly didn't look like you needed help, really. Then he remembered. But your quirk is so cool. You can make things float. Yeah, the girl replied, smiling. But you are amazing too. My name is Ok. Are you kids all right? A police officer was running over to them. Someone reported a mugging. He motioned to the unconscious knife man. Is this him? The girl and Izuku nodded. The officer cuffed the perpetrator and all three of them were then taken to the police station where the knife man was booked and the kids gave their accounts on the situation. Their parents were called, and they were both commended for their quick thinking in this situation. As Izuku was leaving, he heard the girl call after him. Wait, she said. Would you exchange numbers with me? Izuku felt his face flush again. Sure. As he wrote down his number, she said to him. Thank you again for helping me. My name is Ochako Uraraka. What's yours? Izuku paused. He glanced at the news report on the television behind Uraraka. It was displaying Kaken's face and a picture of the sludge villain that killed him. His heart fell into his feet as he heard the reporter, and the villain, reported to be a sludge-like creature, is still at large. Still at large. The words repeated themselves in Izuku's head. Still at large, still at large, still at large. The creature got away. Izuku felt sick again, his knees weak. Uraraka looked at him with an alarmed expression on her face. Are you alright? She said, helping Izuku steady himself. Are you sick? I have to go, Izuku said, getting to his feet. I'm sorry, I have to go. And without another word, Izuku ran before Uraraka could stop him. As Izuku ran towards his home, his heart ached with regret and fear. Not only had he been responsible for the creature getting away from All Might and killing his friend, but it was still out there somewhere. Someone else could be hurt by it, and it would be all Izuku's fault. Izuku ran and ran until he arrived at home. Across the street from the police station, no one had noticed a small aerial drone fly past. Its mission had been accomplished, and the operator was bringing it home. Izuku sighed as he finally walked through the front door of his house. I'm home, he called out. It was only his mother and himself. His father worked overseas and rarely made it home to visit, so Izuku didn't see much of him. Izuku. His mother came scurrying from the living room toward him at a surprisingly fast pace for someone of her height. She wrapped her arms around him, tears in her eyes. When I got the call from the police, I was so scared, she said, breaking away and wiping her tears. Are you all right? I'm fine, Mom, Izuku lied. I'm just tired. They said you saved that girl, she said, pinching his cheek like she always did, ever since he was little. I'm so proud of you. You're a hero, just like you always wanted to be. Those words made Izuku sick. No, I'm not, he said dismissively. Look, Mom, I'm very tired. I would just like to go to bed. It was only the late afternoon, but Izuku wanted to be alone. Oh, okay, replied his mother, a little confused. Would you like some dinner first? I'm not hungry. And with that, he brushed past her and went straight to his room. He lay on his bed, his stomach twisting with knots. His heart ached. His dream was over. His hero was a fraud. His best friend was dead because of him, and the villain that killed him got away. It's not fair, thought Izuku, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. It's just not fair. Izuku looked in the direction of his school bag. It was slightly open and exposed the slightly burnt notebook inside of it. Izuku opened the bag and took it out. It was the notes he had accumulated on different heroes that Kaken had burnt. Almost absent-mindedly, he began to sift through the pages until he stopped at the page with All Might's autograph. Izuku felt an anger welling up inside him that he had never felt before. It wasn't just anger, but a white-hot rage. It built so fast that in as little as a few seconds he felt as if it would burst from him, like pressurized carbonation in a shaken-up soda bottle. He ran to his window, tore it open, and threw the book out with all the strength he could muster. He saw it tumbling into the distance, losing it as it plummeted towards the ground. He took a deep breath. The anger dissipated, almost as quickly as it had come. But it left him feeling drained, so he returned to his bed and collapsed onto it, ready for sleep to overtake him. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from an unknown number. Hello, it read. This is Ochako Uraraka, the girl from the police station. I wanted to thank you again for your help today. I didn't get a chance to properly thank you, or to even get your name. Well, I hope this message finds you and I hope you will text me back. A girl was texting him. Izuku felt himself get flustered again. For a brief moment, he was able to forget all his problems, all he was feeling, and he began composing a response. Hello, he typed. I'm sorry I ran off like that so quickly. You see, Izuku stopped. His stomach was in knots again. He thought of Kaken, of All Might, of the sludge villain. He couldn't tell her the circumstances that led to their meeting, or why he was running in the first place. Nor did he want to. Erasing his message, he instead simply typed, My name is izukumidoriya. You can call me Deku. The sponsorship. The next couple of weeks were really hard for Izuku. His attitude had taken a turn for the worse. Gone was the timid, shy boy of before. He became more aggressive, angrier. Students would still pick on him for being quirkless, would wind up with a bloody nose from him. The fact that he was getting in trouble for fighting was a shock to both students and teachers alike. This was not like Izuku, not like him at all. You need to shape up, young man. His teacher scolded after another fight. Izuku had gotten beaten up pretty bad. The student had a strong quirk, and despite Izuku's knowledge of hero combat, he hadn't put it into practice very often. How do you expect to get into UA if you are labeled a delinquent? The teacher continued. Izuku said nothing. He had given up trying to get into UA. Even if he managed to get in, there was no way he could keep up with the rest of the students there. Yue was out of his league. Uraraka had been texting him periodically. They had developed a friendship, and her texts had become the only ray of light in his life. She told him that she was applying to the UA High Hero program when she graduated at the end of the year. She had encouraged him to apply as well. He always let the conversation drop from there. Izuku still blamed himself for the death of Kaken. What was worse is that Izuku couldn't tell anyone about what happened without risking exposing All Might. All Might, Izuku thought bitterly. Why should I care about keeping his stupid secret? He was the one who crushed my dream, who didn't stop the villain from killing Kaken. He's no hero. But despite this, Izuku still kept his mouth shut. His mother was worried sick, this he knew. He felt guilty for how he was making her worry, but he couldn't pretend that he was the same happy kid he used to be. He had changed, and he knew it. He had told her he no longer wanted to be a hero and was shocked. She tried to talk to him about the fights he was getting into at school and about Kaken's death, but Izuku would just shut down. He knew she was worried, but he didn't know what else to do with himself. As far as he was concerned, his life was over before it even began. Izuku, honey. He heard his mother call to his room. He sighed and lifted himself off his bed, walking towards the living room. To his surprise, she wasn't alone. Seated on the couch across from his mother was a man in what looked like an expensive suit. He was a foreigner, probably American if he had to guess. He stood as Izuku entered the room. Izuku, his mother said. This is Bruce Wayne. He's a businessman from America. A pleasure, said Wayne, extending his hand. Izuku didn't take it. What's this about? Izuku asked plainly. Izuku, don't be rude, his mother scolded. That's quite all right, Miss Midoriya, replied Wayne. Despite being American, he spoke impeccable Japanese. He was tall, standing at least at 6'2", and had a large, powerful build under his suit. His speech and demeanor were friendly, but his eyes suggested a power behind them that would make even the strongest of men crumble to dust. He sat back down on the couch. He's a man who gets straight to the point. I like that. He reached into a briefcase and pulled out a few pamphlets, handing them to Izuku and his mother. The reason I came, said Wayne, is that my company, Wayne Enterprises, represents the Martha Wayne Foundation, an organization that assists in the funding of certain special interest projects, artistic ventures, hospitals, research, and so on. The Martha Wayne Foundation also has a strong interest in schools for the gifted. Specifically, here in Japan, we are a large benefactor to UA High School, as it is the premier hero academy in the nation. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Because of this, Wayne continued. I have the opportunity to sponsor a potential student of my choice to attend UA High. He looked Izuku straight in the eyes with a powerful stare. I believe that you are the right choice for this opportunity. Izuku didn't know what to say. His head was swimming with questions. Why did he want to sponsor him, of all people? On top of that, he had finally begun to put the pain of not being a hero behind him and was ready to move on. Now, this stranger drops into his life and starts dangling it in front of him like a steak to a starving dog. Finally, after a moment, Izuku found his words. Well, you're wasting your time. I'm not gifted. There are dozens of kids at my school who are a much better fit than I am for sponsorship. Your mother tells me that you helped stop a mugging the other day, said Wayne. You rushed in to save a stranger from a potentially dangerous situation without hesitation. I believe this makes you uniquely qualified. Izuku sighed. Well, you'd be wrong, he replied. Uraraka was the one who actually stopped the attacker. I simply provided a long enough distraction for her to use her quirk. Izuku met Wayne's gaze with the same intensity, but Wayne didn't falter. I don't know if this is some publicity stunt or what, Izuku said after a minute. But you'd be better off sponsoring someone who actually has an interest in becoming a hero, not to mention someone who actually has a quirk. Izuku, his mother said incredulously. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Of course, he'll accept your offer, she said to Wayne. He'd be foolish not to. No, said Izuku flatly. I'm being realistic. The quirkless have no business being heroes. He turned and began to walk away, but Wayne stopped him, holding onto his arm. Before you go, young man, he said, I'd like to tell you something. I don't make this offer lightly. It doesn't matter to me if you have a quirk or not. I believe that a hero can be anyone, even you. Izuku pulled away. No, he said simply. They can't. And with that, he walked away, returning to his room. I am so sorry, Izuku's mother said, tears welling in her eyes. He recently lost his childhood friend to a villain. He hasn't been the same since. It's quite all right, said Wayne. He gave Miss Midoriya a business card. The offer still stands. Let me know if he changes his mind. Izuku had gotten quite a lashing from his mother. She burst into his room, tears streaming from her eyes. Why did you act in such a way? she had shouted. "What has gotten into you?" "I don't want to talk about it," said Izuku, turning away from her on his bed. His mother was having none of it. "He had offered you an opportunity you have dreamed about since you were little. A week ago you would have jumped at the chance." She began to tremble, her tears flowing freely now. "What has happened to my little Izuku?" Izuku didn't budge. "He grew up, Mom." And with that, she slid the door shut with a loud bang, and Izuku heard her stomp away. Izuku knew she had every reason to be angry, but she didn't understand how upsetting the situation was to Izuku. As far as he was concerned, fate had dealt to him a cruel hand of wanting to be a hero but had given him no quirk to make it possible. Even the symbol of peace told him his dreams were unrealistic. And yet, fate still continued to torment him by sending Bruce Wayne to him with sponsorship. It was as if he was a starving leash dog being dangled a succulent piece of meat, just out of reach. It was torture. He rolled over onto his bed, fighting his tears. He wanted to forget it all Might, UA High School, the professional heroes, all of it. He looked all around his room, at the posters and action figures of All Might. His unending smile once inspired confidence, hope, and safety in Izuku's heart. Now, all he could see is the thin, sickly shadow of his former self that he had become. Just looking at the memorabilia that lined his room made him sick and angry. Picking himself up, he tore the posters from his walls and packed up all the action figures and merchandise that represented his former hero, All Might. Putting them all in an old box, he went out back to the dumpster behind his house to finally put an end to the pain they gave him, once and for all. The box dropped into the nearly empty dumpster with a satisfying clang. Brushing his hands against each other, Izuku turned to leave. But as he did, in the corner of his eye he saw one of the All Might figures at the top of the box. He was wearing his Silver Age costume. His never-ending smile seemed to shine, despite the lack of light. Izuku paused. The reality of what he just did weighed heavily on him. It was the end of an era for him. His passion to become a hero had been the driving force in Izuku's life for so long, and All Might represented all he aspired to be. Now that he knew the truth, it felt as if his entire life was a lie and all that he worked for only fed the lie. The thought of All Might made Izuku angrier. He slammed the lid of the dumpster down hard, the sound it made scaring a couple of alley cats away. Izuku sighed, collecting himself. He had done it. Every last bit of his past possessions that represented his desire to be a hero was gone. It was all over. "I thought that All Might was the symbol that all heroes aspired to be." The voice spoke behind him, causing Izuku to jump out of his skin, falling on his rear. He hadn't seen the figure before, as his outfit had hidden him well in the shadows. The first thing Izuku saw were his eyes, ghostly white that glowed in the darkness. As he became focused, Izuku was able to see the massive figure the eyes were attached to. It was a man. Izuku was sure of it, but not like any man he had seen before. The man was large, standing easily over 6 tall. His hulking, muscular frame was hardly hidden beneath a skin-tight dark gray bodysuit, which appeared to Izuku to be some form of Kevlar armor. He wore thick black combat boots that stopped at the knee, with matching black gloves and bracers that covered the forearm. Each bracer had 3 curved blades protruding from them. A black billowing cape that reached just above his feet was attached to a black cowl, open only at the jawline and below the nose. 2 ear-like spikes protruded from the top of the cowl. Finally, a large, black bat was stretched across his chest, a symbol that Izuku vaguely recognized. The man advanced on Izuku, who was too frightened to move. He stopped at Izuku's feet and folded his arms as if expecting Izuku to do something. After a pause, the man spoke. "Do you know who I am?" he said in that deep, gravelly voice. It was quiet, but it shook Izuku to his core. He imagined it was the very same voice the Grim Reaper would use. Izuku racked his brain, trying to answer the question, but he was too frightened to speak. After studying the symbol on his chest, he finally found his words. "I've heard stories about you," he said, "but I wasn't sure if you were even real." "Most aren't," said Batman, extending his hand for Izuku, helping him up. "What have you heard?" "A lot of things," said Izuku. "You're like a modern-day Bujaman. Some people say that you can disappear in a wisp of smoke, like a ninja, or transform into a savage beast. They all call you." Izuku swallowed, pushing out the word. "Komori, the bat." The man nodded, a small smirk appearing on his dark face. "Stories that criminals tell each other that fuels their fear of me," he said. "I am vengeance. I am the Knight Incarnate. I am justice. I am Batman." What are you doing here?" Izuku said quietly. He couldn't believe that he was standing just a few feet away from a legend itself. Very few people claimed to have seen the Batman, and their stories always varied. One man, after his encounter, claimed the Batman burst into 1,000 bats that attacked him all at once. Another said that he moved faster than lightning in the shadows. Another account claimed that he had emptied an entire clip of bullets, but was ultimately useless against the hero. The Batman considered him for a minute. "Since you were a small boy, you dreamed of being a hero," he said, surprising Izuku. How could he know that about him? In fact, why did he know that about Izuku? Of all people, why him? What would this dark hero from America possibly want with him? But now it seems you have revoked that dream, Batman continued, looking at the All Might merchandise Izuku just discarded. But why? Izuku stared at him. It didn't make any sense. "I don't want to be a hero," Izuku replied plainly. The Batman raised an eyebrow under his cowl, which seemed to be made of a material that was able to contort with his facial expressions. "Really?" he said, more of a statement than a question. He lifted his hand, a small circular device resting in it. In an instant, the device sprang to life and revealed a holo projection of Izuku and Uraraka with the knife-wielding criminal. "You saw the situation and acted without thinking," he said. "Rash and careless, running headlong into danger without a plan. But nonetheless, the intention was clear. You wanted to save this young woman." He put away the holo projector, leaving Izuku stunned. How had he gotten that footage? Maybe a mobile phone, but it looked like it was taken from an aerial position. He didn't remember seeing anything or anyone flying around them, but he was distracted at the time. "These actions," continued the Batman, "do not reflect someone who does not wish to be a hero." "I was just doing what anyone else would have done," said Izuku, trying to brush it off. "Wrong," said the Batman flatly. "Anyone else would have gone for help or called the police." Izuku's fear was rapidly being replaced with annoyance. Why did he have to explain himself to this stranger? What did he even want from him? "What does it matter what I did?" said Izuku, finally rising to his feet. "Because you still acted in the face of danger in an effort to save someone who was in distress, despite not having a quirk," said Batman. Izuku froze. "How did you know that?" he said. The Batman pulled up the holo projector again, this time displaying some sort of file with Izuku's picture. "Midoriya Izuku," said the Batman. "Age 15. Quirk, none. Born to Hisashi Midoriya, Quirk, Fire Breath, and Inko Midoriya, Quirk. Attraction, limited to small objects." The projection changed to his medical records, indicating lack of manifestation of quirk. "There's nothing I don't know about you, Midoriya," said the Bat, sending a chill down Izuku's spine. Izuku had had enough of this. "What do you want with me?" he said angrily, a little louder than he meant to. The Batman didn't react. "You're angry," said the Batman. "That's good." "Good," spat Midoriya. What was good about being angry? He was making less and less sense by the minute. "You haven't answered my question. Why are you bothering me? Why do you have all this information on me? What do you want with me?" The Batman drew closer. Izuku wanted to run away, but he couldn't. He rose his fists defensively. The Batman stopped. "I have no intention to harm you," he said, a slightly amused look on his face. One of his gloved hands that were concealed by his cape held out an object for Izuku to take. It was his notebook. "How did you get this?" Izuku said, taking it. Despite the anger he felt when he discarded it, having it returned to him undamaged was a somewhat welcome sight for Izuku. "Even at your age, your analytical abilities are impressive," said Batman, ignoring the question. Izuku flipped through the pages, stopping once again on the All Might's signature. He felt the anger again before, but it quickly evolved into, Izuku didn't quite know, but like a strange feeling of bitterness. "It doesn't matter anymore," Izuku said finally. "Neither does wanting to be a hero. You know I don't have a quirk. Some villains just can't be beaten without a quirk." "Is that you talking, or All Might?" Izuku's head snapped up. Batman's face was passive. Izuku swallowed hard. If he knew what All Might said to him, then he would know All Might's secret. But even so, he didn't want to bring it up and test his luck, so he remained silent. The Batman didn't press him. "If hearing that all throughout your life didn't stop you then, what is stopping you now?" Caution flashed through Izuku's memory. He felt sick again, as he usually did when he remembered him. Izuku could feel the tears returning to his eyes, but he pushed them away. "I don't deserve to be a hero," he said finally. "I can't save anyone." "Not everyone can be saved," said Batman. Izuku felt himself trembling. The guilt had been building up inside him for weeks. He didn't know how much more he could take before going crazy. "What if," he said quietly, "what if you were the cause?" Batman said nothing, tilting his head slightly. He was waiting for an explanation. "What if," Izuku continued, "someone died because of you? Your actions caused someone to be killed. That would mean that you weren't meant to be a hero, right?" "You're asking a question that's not really a question," said Batman. "Something did happen, didn't it?" This time Izuku said nothing. He felt as though his heart was going to burst from his chest. His throat swelled, and despite his efforts, tears began to form again in his eyes. He felt something resting upon his shoulder. Looking up, he saw it was the massive, gloved hand of the Batman. He was looking down at Izuku, this time with what looked like compassion, understanding. "Don't fight it, Midoriya," he said softly. "Feel your pain. Own it. Master it." Izuku broke down, dropping to his knees. He could feel the tears streaming down his face, the weight of all the pain and guilt he felt since Kaken's death pouring out of him through his sobs. "It's all my fault," he said finally. "If it wasn't for me, Kaken would still be alive. If it wasn't for me, All Might would have stopped that sludge monster. I caused it to get away. All Might said I couldn't be a hero without a quirk, and that I should give up and do something else," Izuku continued. "And Kaken died because of me. And the monster is still out there. It's all my fault." Batman waited for Izuku to calm down. Finally, he lifted Izuku up to his feet. "A hero's life is laced with tragedy," he said. "It's an unavoidable part of the mission. You can't undo what you did, but you can use it to make you stronger." "But what if I told you," the Batman continued, "that you could bring your friend's murderer to justice?" Izuku could hardly dare believe it was possible. "How?" he said. "That is up to you," replied the Batman, "and whether or not you are prepared to do what is necessary." He took a device from his belt and handed it to Izuku. It was a smartphone, but one that Izuku was not familiar with. "You are to keep this on you at all times," said Batman. "When the time is right, we'll be in touch." He then backed away from Izuku and began to walk away. Wait, Izuku called after him. "When the time is right for what?" The Batman glanced over his shoulder, taking a gun-like device from his belt. "Your training," he replied. "You, Izuku Midoriya, will become a hero. That I promise." And without another word, the gun device fired a long cable, and the Batman disappeared into the night, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts. For the first time since his talk with All Might, he felt a small ray of hope shining in his heart. The protege of the Bat. It had been a week since Izuku's encounter with the Batman. If it wasn't for the device that he carried with him, he may have thought it had been a hallucination. Although he didn't know entirely what was going to happen, he had a feeling that it was the right direction to be going. He also felt that he was about to embark on the most difficult journey of his life. He didn't know the half of it. Izuku waited patiently for Batman to contact him on the device. It looked like a simple smartphone, but it seemed to be connected to some sort of virtual private network, rather than to any of the regular cell phone carriers in the city. He had played around with it a little but was nervous about messing something up, so he left it alone for the most part. Izuku couldn't get over the last thing that the Batman said to him. "You, Izuku Midoriya, will become a hero. That I promise." For the first time in his life, he had validation. He had someone who believed in him, someone to guide him and help him to become a hero. He could hardly wait. Izuku was in study hall when he suddenly felt his phone vibrating. He still regularly chatted with Uraraka, so it was probably a text from her. But it kept vibrating. It was a call. He glanced down at his backpack and froze. He could see his phone in the front pouch of the backpack. The ringing continued in his pocket. This was it. This was the call. Izuku stood upright suddenly and informed the startled teacher he had to go to the bathroom. Running out into the hall, he found a secluded area and took a breath. His hands shaking, he took the phone out of his pocket. Batman's symbol was stretched across the screen as it rang. Hardly daring to breathe, Izuku answered it. Hello, he squeaked into the phone. Surprisingly, it wasn't that gruff, sandpaper-like voice he was expecting. "Hello, is this Master Midoriya?" It was the voice of an older individual, respectful and formal, with an accent that Izuku placed as British. And he knew Izuku's name. "Yes," Izuku replied, stunned. "Yes, this is Izuku Midoriya." "Jolly good," the man replied. "I will be arriving promptly after school to take you to meet with your benefactor. Look for the limousine." And with that, the call disconnected, leaving Izuku dumbfounded. He was bursting with questions. Who on earth was that? Should he trust him? Well, Izuku thought, he was calling on this line, so he must know Batman. I didn't know he had partners. After a minute or so, Izuku looked around him to see people in the hall staring at him. He had been muttering to himself again. Blushing, he decided it was best to hold his questions until the end of school. He would have to call his mother to let her know he would be staying after school to avoid concern. He started to walk back to class when he paused. Did he say limousine? Izuku walked slowly as he anxiously looked throughout the courtyard for his contact. All he knew was that he was looking for a foreigner with a limousine. Something like was not seen very often in this area of the city, so he should stick out like a sore thumb. But Izuku didn't see anyone yet. It was all so confusing, so nerve-wracking. He was going to be trained by this Batman. But what did that entail? How would he? "Master Midoriya, I presume," said a voice behind him. Izuku jumped about a foot as he spun around. Before he stood a tall man, wearing a fine suit, complete with white gloves and wing-tipped shoes. His wrinkled face, gray mustache, and balding hair gave him a grandfatherly look, with a kind but piercing blue eyes behind his spectacles. He smiled warmly at Izuku. "What is it with you guys and sneaking up on people?" said Izuku, rubbing his palpitating chest. "Terribly sorry," said the man, smiling a little. "A side effect of being in the employ of a man who dresses like a flying rodent." He bowed respectfully. "Alfred Pennyworth, at your service." "Mr. Pennyworth," Izuku began. "Please, Master Midoriya," replied Alfred. "Just Alfred will do nicely." Alfred," said Izuku. "What exactly is going on?" "All will be made clear to you once we have arrived at our destination, young master," said Alfred, tapping the side of his nose. "If you would be so kind as to follow me." Izuku felt extremely self-conscious as he approached the limousine parked outside the school. There were students and passers-by, some from his class, that gawked as he passed them. He could only imagine the questions that they would bombard him with tomorrow. He had no idea how he was going to answer them. Once inside, Izuku was amazed at how luxurious the accommodations of the limousine were. The seats were expensive leather with plenty of leg space. There were a built-in television, telephone, and mini fridge. The air conditioning felt great to Izuku after such a hot and humid day. The floor of the interior was a fine carpet that felt plush beneath Izuku's shoes. Izuku had never been in such luxury before but was not entirely surprised. Even though pro-heroes were paid by the government for their services, many of them had separate businesses that capitalized on their popularity. This allowed the most popular, such as All Might, to enjoy some of the finest luxuries money could buy. The trip only took about 20 minutes. Alfred had taken him into Uptown Camino, where Alfred guided him into a large office building. The security guard at the desk waved them through with a nod, and they entered the elevator. Alfred waved a keycard in front of the scanner and pushed the button to take them to the penthouse office. When the elevator opened, it revealed to be a long, partially lit hallway, lined with windows on each side that opened to an expansive view of the city. Alfred led him down the hallway, which led a large pair of double doors. Alfred opened the door and led Izuku in. Inside was an extravagant office. It was minimally decorated, with a large desk, 2 couches, an armchair, and a few paintings that lined the walls. Izuku assumed that each piece was very expensive. The desk was located at the end of the room, a large computer screen resting on top of it. High on the wall behind them was a large oil painting of a handsome, mustached man, standing next to a beautiful woman. Someone was sitting at the desk. Their face was obstructed by the computer screen. Alfred cleared his throat. "Your guest has arrived, Master Wayne." Bruce Wayne stood up from behind the desk, smiling at Izuku's shocked expression. "Thank you, Alfred," he replied. Alfred simply bowed and excused himself, leaving Izuku and Wayne alone. Izuku was confused, trying to piece together what just happened in his mind. Wayne said nothing, simply leaning against the front of the desk, smiling as Izuku wrestled with this turn of events. "Mr. Wayne," Izuku said finally, "I don't understand. Why are you here? What's going on?" "You're about to find out," Wayne replied. He walked back behind his desk and pressed the underside of his desk. The wall behind him parted just below the painting, revealing a dark corridor that Wayne started to walk down, gesturing Izuku to follow him. At the end of the dark corridor was a large, metal cage elevator, which opened for them as they approached. There were only 2 buttons on the elevator, up and down. Wayne pressed the down button, and they began their descent. Izuku didn't know how long the elevator descent was. Probably minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As the elevator descended lower, Izuku had the feeling that they had traveled below ground. But the elevator continued deeper. Finally, it came to a shaking halt, and the cage door before them swung open. The way before them was dimly lit and appeared to be some sort of empty warehouse. Wayne pursued forward without hesitation, Izuku trailing behind him apprehensively. "Lights on," said Wayne, his voice echoing. Immediately, the warehouse lights flashed to life, causing Izuku to have to shield his eyes while they adjusted to the brightness. As they came back into focus, Izuku beheld before him the most incredible sight he had ever seen. The warehouse wasn't empty as Izuku had first thought. Izuku found himself to be in some sort of large armory. With all the equipment, he could have easily mistaken it for a military compound. Lining the walls were racks filled with gadgets and devices of all kinds, grenades and canisters of varying shapes and sizes, devices that looked like small projectile firearms, but with large claws fitted into the nozzle, several large collapsible boomerangs of different sizes, tactical weaponry such as batons, a few carbon fiber collapsible staffs, tasers, and others that Izuku didn't recognize and realized were probably custom engineered. There were shelves of electronic devices, such as radios, transmitters, small computers, and tablets. Large military-grade boxes that were stacked on top of each other, as well as end-to-end, lined the walls of the warehouse. Some seemed haphazardly placed, others were opened, with more items found on the shelves pouring out. Farther into the warehouse could be seen several large armored assault vehicles. One looked like someone had combined a tank with a Humvee, which Izuku assumed allowed for more maneuverability. It was armed to the teeth with what looked to be rocket launchers, railguns, and heavy armor plating. Next to it was what appeared to be a black fighter jet and several other smaller vehicles, some that were duplicates of the tank, but without all the painting and weaponry. A large computer with several screens was at the opposite end of the vehicles in the warehouse. On the various displays were running different programs, codes, and applications that Izuku couldn't discern. Next to that seemed to be some sort of training area, with several free weights, machines, training bags and dummies, and Olympic-style acrobatic equipment. There was even a pool, and something seemed to be submerged inside of it, but was too dark to identify. Wayne took out a small device from his breast coat pocket, pressing it. Next, near the computer station, a small platform seemed to be rising. Upon closer inspection, it was a tall, metal locker. When it finished rising, the metal grate doors parted in the middle. What it revealed left Izuku shocked, even more so than discovering this enormous arsenal cache, an armored, Kevlar suit with a large bat symbol stretched across the chest. Izuku looked up to the smirking Wayne, who walked over and sat in the chair in front of the computer station. Izuku was at a loss for words. It was all so much to take in. Wayne only sat there, waiting for Izuku to collect himself. "I have so many questions," said Izuku weakly. Despite this, one stuck out in his mind immediately. "Why me?" Wayne forward in his chair, contemplating. "Some villains just can't be beaten without a quirk. That's what he said to you, isn't it?" said Wayne. Izuku hesitated, finally nodding. "How did you know?" he asked. "I've known All Might for a long time," said Wayne, "and have kept an eye on him since the debut of his hero career 10 years ago. Year after year I watched his quirk's power grow to immense proportions. The sheer weight of his power is immeasurable and seems to be able to grow at will." Wayne stood from his chair and walked over to a large table covered with files and documents. "For over 20 years I have made it a mission to study abnormalities in nature. The nature of what society calls quirks goes by another name as well, the meta-human phenomenon. This phenomenon," Wayne continued, sifting through the files, handing some of them to Izuku, "has manifested itself in incalculable ways, mutation, ability amplification, and has even caused forward leaps in evolution. Some of the files included individuals with powerful and potentially dangerous quirks, such as an explosion, super strength, and even mind control. Other files were of individuals who have manifested a quirk that physically changed them, animal quirks, mutation quirks, etc. One file showed the quirk of a boy that literally transformed his body into a gelatin-like substance, and another detailed an extremely rare case of an animal gaining hyper-intelligence by developing a quirk. But as of 5 years ago," said Wayne, "All Might's power began to rapidly decrease. He all but disappeared from the spotlight, spending less and less time on hero work. To determine the cause, I began to observe him 5 months ago." Wayne walked to the computer and began to show Izuku video feed of All Might. "He is very difficult to track. His quirk allows him to move great speeds, but I was able to find a pattern. He was only active for about 3 hours a day. Sometimes it was all at once, others it was spent intermittently, but they always hover around the 3-hour mark. If you are friends," said Izuku, "why couldn't you just talk to him about it?" Wayne gave Izuku a wry smile. "I said we knew each other," he said, "but I didn't say we were friends." Wayne returned to the computer. "But last month, I was finally able to obtain this footage." He paused. "This may be hard for you to watch." He pulled up a video feed of Izuku being attacked by the sludge monster. Izuku felt like a weight was dropped into his stomach. Seeing the monster again brought on an uncomfortable feeling to Izuku. It was like a cross between immense anger and immense guilt. It fast-forwarded to him and All Might on the rooftop, with All Might deflating in a puff of smoke and showing Izuku the wound on his chest. "Pretty gross, right?" said the recording of All Might. "I got this in a fight about 5 years back. My respiratory system is shot, and all the surgeries have worn me out. There's no fixing it. After that, it all connected," said Wayne. His injuries, the decrease in his power and time spent on duty. The conclusion, the symbol of peace is dying. Even though he knew about this already, those words troubled Izuku. All Might had almost single-handedly reduced all the crime across the country. His strength and the safety he conveyed with his smile inspired hope, and with it a new age of peace and happiness. If All Might were to disappear, Or worse, if he were to die, then the vacuum of power that he would leave in his wake would shake the foundations of their society. But what does this have to do with me? Izuku asked. Wayne punched in a few keys on the computer. The screen switched to show footage of Izuku and Uraraka on the day she was accosted. Ever since your meeting with All Might, he said, I have kept an eye on you. I have always relied on my intuition, and it has never failed me. And that intuition told me that you, in some way, were significant. Izuku felt his face flush, despite himself. He hung his head. I don't know why, he said. I'm just a quirkless nobody. Wayne considered him for a minute. What do you know about quirks? He asked. Izuku was confused. He wasn't sure if the question was rhetorical. Well, they're super abilities that are unique to the individual, he said. Sometimes they are passed down from generation to generation. No one knows how it happened, but the first quirk happened about 100 years ago in China. Wayne nodded. That's the general consensus, he said. Now let's discuss what you don't know. He turned back to his computer and pulled up a file of a bald, middle-aged man of muscular build in an orange jumpsuit. Do you know this man? Izuku's eyes widened. That's Lex Luthor, he said incredulously. The American supervillain, Superman's greatest enemy, and one of the most dangerous villains of all time. You know your stuff, said Wayne, impressed. But what you don't know is that, in a way, it is because of this man that we have quirks to begin with. He punched in a few keys on the keyboard, pulling up a video feed. There stood 4 individuals, a woman clad in armor, a sword and a golden rope at her side, a tall, muscular man dressed in a tight blue suit with a flowing red cape, and the Batman himself. Standing before them was none other than Lex Luthor, wearing a large power suit. He looked different than in his previous picture. He had several scars across his face, his left eye replaced by a glowing, yellow orb. They stood aboard some sort of space station observations deck, the Earth visible from the giant window before them. My greatest triumph was at hand, said Luthor, the final campaign in my long war against Superman. While his powers were drained in constant battle, sending him into space to recharge from the Earth's yellow sun, I struck. But my obsession had blinded me to the real threat, to Earth's true enemy. The 3 heroes before him said nothing. Batman stared at Luthor with his signature brooding glare, his distrust almost physically palpable. Luthor continued his story. Brainiac had returned. For years he had been stealing the powers of Earth's protectors, but we were too busy fighting amongst ourselves to see the danger. With you 3 dead, he indicated to the heroes before him. Brainiac quickly eliminated the remaining heroes. The lucky ones, Luthor looked down solemnly, died fighting. Finally, I alone survived, said Luthor bitterly, a rat in the walls of the Brainiac construct. I have traveled through time to warn you. This is my past, but your future, and it means the end of humanity, so together we must change it. The mechanical hand of his power suit stretched toward the Earth outside the viewport, and a giant pulse emitted from its surface, stretching until the entire Earth was covered. Batman had had enough. What have you done, Luthor? He demanded, stepping forward. Given you a fighting chance, he retorted. I stole Brainiac's exobytes and sent them back in time 100 years ago, releasing them into the Earth's atmosphere. They contain the abilities of superhumans from my time and across the galaxy, and they will bestow those powers onto any they come in contact with. What you just saw was a change in the timeline, where 80% of the Earth now possesses some form of superhuman ability. This new onset of superhuman abilities will cause society to come to a halt, Luthor continued. That is why I have sent them back 100 years. It has given humanity the time it needs to adapt, to evolve. The world as you know it has changed. But now they are ready. He's lying, said Batman. It has to be some sort of trick. Why should we trust you? Because if you don't, replied Luthor, the Earth is doomed. The video ended. Izuku was speechless at what he just saw. Wayne turned back to Izuku. This happened over a decade ago, chronologically, said Bruce. When we returned to Earth from the Watchtower, the world had drastically changed from the time shift. But Luthor was successful in his endeavor. Brainiac was repelled and defeated, and after 100 years since the introduction of the exobytes, the world continued to evolve into a new age of quirks and superpowers. But, Izuku said, trying to wrap his mind around this new information, I've never heard of any of this. There are no reports, no news articles, nothing of an alien invasion, or of this Brainiac. The Justice League made sure of that, confirmed Wayne. We covertly gathered as many superpowered individuals as we could, both hero and villain alike, and formed a strike force against Brainiac. When he entered our solar system to begin the invasion, we began our strike. After his defeat, it was agreed that, in an effort to prevent a panic, the events of the Brainiac invasion became classified. This is so overwhelming, Izuku said. I mean, the implications of what this means alone are amazing. The first individual on record to ever develop a quirk was just a little girl in China, and after that quirks became a part of society. To think that they were because of a space alien and time travel is just too much to comprehend. It could change the very fabric of our history. Izuku trailed off, continuously muttering to himself. Midoriya, said Wayne, after a minute. But Izuku was still lost in thought. Midoriya. Finally, Izuku snapped back to reality. I understand it's hard to believe, said Wayne, smiling. That is the exact reason we suppress this truth. But there's a reason I showed this to you. I wanted to show you that quirks themselves are not a natural phenomenon like everyone believes. You have been outcast your entire life because you don't have a quirk, Bruce continued. They have led you to believe that you are not special, but it is just the opposite. Quirks are not a natural phenomenon, but you are, and, in a way, that makes you special. Izuku had never thought of it that way, and the implication of Wayne's words warmed his heart. But there's more to it than that, said Wayne. It hadn't become clear to me yet, but after observing you, I saw it with my own eyes. All Might told you that you couldn't become a hero without a quirk. But he also told you something else. Heroes are always risking their lives. And you did just that. Wayne rose from his chair. Despite the fact that you had no quirk, were essentially powerless, you still risked your life to help a stranger in need. This is what being a hero is all about. Izuku looked away. But I don't deserve it, said Izuku. If it wasn't for me, Kaken would still be alive. How can I be worthy to become a hero with that on my conscience? Wayne considered him for a moment. He walked over to his desk and took the picture frame that was on it, handing it to Izuku. It was an old photograph of the handsome, mustached man and the beautiful woman. But this time, sitting between them, was a young boy. These are my parents, said Wayne. Izuku looked up to see him sitting in the chair again. His demeanor had completely changed. He was somber, almost sad. When I was 8 years old, Wayne continued, we had gone out one night to see a movie. It was my favorite at the time, The Mask of Zorro. I remember being so excited, I couldn't wait to go. Wayne leaned back in the chair and sighed. But it would be the night that would change my life forever. My father, he said, was a doctor. He was respected by the community for his medical prowess, as well as his skills in business. He ran my family's company when my grandfather passed. My mother, he added, was beautiful and kind, a woman who would never give up, who would always do the right thing, no matter what. That night at the theater, Wayne said, his eyes darkening. My father decided to take a shortcut home through the alleys. It was a dark time then. Heroes weren't as common then as they are now. Wayne paused. Izuku couldn't decide if he wanted to hear the end of this story. But Wayne continued. It happened quickly, he said finally. First, he took my mother's pearls. Then he went for my father. 2 shots. He motioned with his fingers, indicating the firing of a gun. That's all it took. 2 shots and my parents were taken from me. Izuku felt a strong sense of sympathy for Wayne. It was hard to see this side of him. I'm sorry, he said. What happened to him? The mugger. Wayne shrugged. They never caught him. To this day, the Martha and Thomas Wayne case is cold. Izuku's stomach twisted. He thought of Kaken and the monster that killed him. They still hadn't found him. For all he knew, the monster would never be caught, like the murderer who killed Wayne's parents. The thought made him feel a mix of emotions, fear, anger, and shame. Izuku was brought back to reality by Wayne placing a hand on his shoulder. Nothing can bring back your friend, said Wayne. And nothing can change what happened. Izuku could feel his eyes welling up with tears. But, continued Wayne, you have the chance to make a difference, Izuku. Izuku wiped his tears and met Wayne's gaze. How? He said fiercely. What do I need to do? Wayne smiled. Become a hero. Own the pain you feel. It gives you strength, power, and resolve. Rise above quirks, rise above society, rise above all might, and embrace the truth. A hero can be anyone, so long as they are willing to heed the call. Not to fame or wealth, but to the mission, to see it through to the end. You must vow, with every fiber of your being, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Ask yourself, Izukumidoriya, continued Wayne, from the bottom of your heart, from the very depths of your soul, will you be a hero? Yes, said Izuku. Louder, boy, shouted Wayne. Will you be a hero? Yes, shouted Izuku. Say it. I will be a hero. Izuku's cries rang all around him. Wayne gave him a satisfied smile. Then your training begins now. Hours later, Izuku returned home. Upon seeing her, he hugged his mother for the first time in a month and apologized. He told her that he was going to accept Wayne's proposal, much to her happiness. He went to his room and collapsed on his bed. He was bruised and sore from the training. Wayne had told him that the next 9 months would be the hardest he ever faced in his life. But honestly, Izuku didn't care. For the first time in his life, someone believed in him. He was going to make his dreams come true. He was going to bring Kaken's killer to justice. He was going to be a hero. Izuku never felt so alive. 9 months in hell. Izuku felt sick, his limbs shaking. He was hunched over on all fours over a puddle of his own vomit and bile. His face was bleeding and his muscles ached. He was in hell and his trainer was the devil himself. It had been nearly 8 months since his training began. Every night was a different type of torture. He trained his body to the point of physical exhaustion with rigorous weight, machine and acrobatic training. Wayne would fire rubber bullets at him through the mounted turrets on the firing range, training his reflexes and maneuverability. The point isn't to dodge bullets, Wayne had said. That's impossible. Focus on the trajectory of the bullets from the positioning of the gun's muzzle and adjust your movements accordingly. Izuku never knew how much it hurt to get shot by a rubber bullet until now. To test his problem-solving abilities, Wayne would trap him in various rooms, each with a different trial to overcome. One room was filled with mines that Izuku had to navigate. Another time, he was handcuffed to a secure fixture inside a room while trying to figure out a way to escape while the room filled with water. The warehouse seemed to go deeper than Izuku had originally anticipated. Below the armory and training floor, there were several bunkers that functioned as simulators for various emergency situations. Villain attacks, where Izuku was forced to fight several animatronic foes, each with different fighting styles, emergency search and rescue operations, fire, flood, earthquake, even alien invasions. Nothing was too far-fetched to be considered a possibility to the Batman. On top of physical training, Wayne would put him through intense mental conditioning exercises. Much of these exercises involved observation and analysis of Izuku's performance during the simulated scenarios. Wayne would have him study and analyze police files and criminal cases, murder, kidnapping, arson, rape. No subject was taboo. Izuku found that he was particularly skilled at these exercises, so much so that Wayne would continually throw in red herrings and false leads to mislead him. As the months dragged on, Izuku had already noticed his mental and emotional acuity sharpening due to these exercises. Izuku also found that his fighting prowess had grown exponentially under the Batman's tutelage. He was trained in every practical form of combat conceivable, from U.S. Navy SEAL training to Shaolin martial arts. He was trained in several forms of weaponry: batons, swords, shuriken, knives, stun weapons, and then some, all except firearms, to which Wayne was vehemently opposed. Wayne was even stricter when it came to Izuku's education and practical knowledge. He tutored him in various fields of science: engineering, technology, forensics, chemistry, physics, medicine, anatomy, psychology, computers and cybersecurity, business, strategy, and even driving and piloting. On top of that, Izuku was learning enough practical and theoretical criminology that he assumed would be studied by doctoral students at university. Alfred also had a hand in tutoring him in both his school and hero studies, and Izuku saw his grades and exam scores increase tenfold. Bruce was also teaching him about the various practical uses of the gadgetry he employed in the field. Most of the devices were not conventional items you could pick up at any electronics store. They were unique items that were designed specifically for Batman's crusade. There were both offensive and defensive items, used to subdue an opponent or counteract villain abilities. Batsuits with different protective armors, suits that adapted to different environmental situations, such as cold or heat, batarangs of various size and functionality, designed to stun or disarm an opponent, various explosives, glue grenades, smoke pellets, grapple hooks, and many, many more. Izuku had grown quite adept to the use of these tools and gadgets. His natural tactical analysis skills afforded him an ability to creatively use the gadgets in various unorthodox ways. This impressed Bruce immensely, since Izuku was at an inherent disadvantage against super-powered adversaries. Mastery of these tools would even the odds and even turn the tide in many dire situations and skirmishes. Much to his surprise, Izuku realized that he was particularly adept at working with explosives. He supposed he shouldn't have been too shocked at this. After all, he had observed and had been on the receiving end of Kaken's explosive quirk nearly all his life. Batman kept a vast array of explosive material: grenades, C4, plastic explosives, smoke bombs, exploding batarangs, and an experimental explosive gel, which delivered its payload from a device that reminded Izuku of a painting gun. Studying explosives took on another meaning for Izuku as well. He felt that, in a way, he was keeping Kaken's memory alive, and felt that he owed it to his former friend to develop this proficiency. Over the months, Izuku came to understand Bruce and Alfred a little better. Bruce was, for the most part, distant and aloof. He rarely smiled and was always working. He was a brutal and harsh taskmaster during their training, but not heartless. He encouraged and supported Izuku, albeit sparingly, and generally cared for his well-being. Alfred was much gentler and kinder. Although he was Bruce's protege, outside of training Izuku spent most of his time with Alfred, since Bruce was always so busy. He took a strong interest in Izuku in his studies and was always there to pick him up after each brutal training session. He was fiercely loyal to Bruce and often acted in more of a fatherly fashion towards him, rather than that of an employee. Despite the difference in status, it was clear that Bruce respected and cared about Alfred and saw him as an equal. Alfred would usually take Izuku to school and return him home after training. He had spent so much time with him that Izuku's mother had grown quite fond of the kindly old Alfred. Whenever he was over there, he would immediately offer his assistance to her, whether it was cleaning, laundry, or cooking. His sense of humor and charming demeanor was always making her smile. They would often regale each other of stories from their youth, raising Bruce and Izuku, or even housekeeping tips. Back at the warehouse, Izuku was struggling to get to his feet. His training had increased in intensity over the past months, and they were only getting harder. Most specifically, Izuku was testing his fighting prowess against an even more formidable foe, the Batman himself, and he was losing badly. "Get up, Midoriya," said Bruce, his arms folded. They had been sparring for 3 hours, and Izuku wasn't able to land a single hit. "Get up," he snapped again. "If this were a real fight, you'd be dead by now." Izuku got to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly beneath him. He was sure some of his bones were broken, but he stood regardless, ready to fight. "Good," said Bruce. "Now try to stay up this time." He advanced on Izuku, who leaped into the air, trying to get a vantage point above him to strike. But Bruce was ready and sidestepped his attack. Turning on his heel, Bruce's axe kick connected to the back of Izuku's head, sending him back to the ground in a heap. At first, all he could see were colors, and then, gradually, his sight went dark as he drifted into unconsciousness. "You're pushing him too hard, Master Bruce. The UA entrance exam is next month. He'll be up against odds he's never faced before. If he's to be ready, he needs to be pushed." Izuku was starting to come back to reality. People were arguing. He vaguely recognized the voices as Alfred and Bruce. "At what cost, Master Bruce?" said Alfred, exasperated. "I understand what it means to him to enter the academy, and what it means to you to train the boy. But he's overworked. He needs to rest." Izuku groaned, leaning up slightly as the fuzziness in his head cleared. Alfred gently pushed him back to lie down. "Easy, Master Midoriya," he said. "You've had quite a few nasty bumps." Izuku was laying on a hospital bed in the warehouse, being treated by Alfred. His bones were knitted and his wounds were gone. He felt extremely drowsy and had some lingering pain, but felt better overall. When Izuku had first injured himself training, he was surprised when Alfred revealed to him that he had a quirk of his own, healing. Izuku had broken his wrist after falling off a pommel horse during his gymnastic training. Alfred simply grasped it tightly, a warmth spreading throughout his wrist. When he released it, it was completely healed. Alfred had explained that he was once a soldier in the British military, and his quirk allowed him to save many lives as a field medic. Not only that, it proved to be useful in assisting Bruce when he returned from a mission in bad shape. Despite Alfred's protesting, Izuku leaned up and rested on his elbows. "Bruce is right," he said weakly. "I'm already going to the exam at a huge disadvantage because I don't have a quirk. I need to work harder." He sat up from the couch he was laying on and stood, steadying himself slightly as his legs were still weak. "I don't just want to get into UA," he continued. "I want to excel. I want to prove to them that just because I'm quirkless doesn't make me less of a hero. I want to show them I can do it." Alfred glanced at Bruce, who was looking at Izuku with a small, approving smile. "And you will," he said. "There's only 1 month left until the exam. You are ready to take your skills to the next level." He turned and began to walk away. "Get some sleep. You'll need all your strength for tomorrow." The underground, Camino Ward. Midnight. A black sedan speeds through the near-empty streets. Inside the sedan were 2 men. The driver was a scruffy, unshaven man, a large scar stretching from his left eye to his right upper lip. He wore ragged clothes, with a frayed red scarf wrapped loosely around his shoulders, concealing the bottom of his face, and a black beanie cap that reached down to his eyebrows, making it difficult to passers-by to see his face. The boy next to him dressed just as shabbily, wearing a frayed black hoodie with a gray tank top underneath, red fingerless gloves, and cargo shorts. His normally messy green hair was covered by a red bandana, and a domino mask covered his eyes, concealing his identity. He fidgeted nervously in his seat. "Don't be scared," said Bruce, without taking his eyes off the road. "I'm not scared," Izuku lied. Upon arriving at the warehouse that night, he was surprised to see Bruce dressed as a homeless thug and was ordered to dress as he was now. "Where we're going," he had said. "It's better that no one knows who we are, but it's the best place for you to get practical combat experience." "Where are we going?" asked Izuku. "The underground," Bruce replied simply. Izuku had heard of the underground. It was an illegal fighting ring that had eluded the authorities for years. They always chose a different place to fight, and you had to know someone to get there. In the underground, there were no rules. Any quirk was sanctioned, and you won only when your opponent was no longer standing. It was a place Izuku never thought he would ever find himself at. And not only was he going there, but he was going to fight. "People see you as disadvantaged because you don't have a quirk," said Bruce. "You need to test yourself against those who are naturally stronger than you. It's only when faced with a situation that seems impossible will you surpass your limits." They pulled into a covered parking structure. Once parked, they walked to the elevator that led into the building and took it down to the basement. The elevator doors opened to a dank, darkened hallway. Izuku could hear loud music blasting from the large double doors at the end of the hallway. Next to the double doors stood a hulking gorilla-faced bouncer. He glared at the Bruce and Izuku as they approached. Bruce merely flashed him what Izuku assumed was several $1,000s, and the bouncer nodded towards the doors, indicating they could proceed. Past the doors, Izuku felt the immediate assault of his senses, the loud, screeching music playing over the raucous cheers of the surrounding crowd. The smells of cigarette smoke and booze filled the air, burning Izuku's lungs and stinging his eyes. The crowd consisted of a motley crew of varying assortment: mutants, gangsters, thugs, prostitutes, gamblers, delinquents, and other dubious characters the likes of which Izuku had never seen before. In the middle of the room were two men. One of them was a tall and lanky man, using a stretching quirk, trying in vain to subdue his opponent, a burly, bald man with a strength-type quirk. The lanky man wrapped himself around the bald man, who tried to break free of his binding. The lanky man attempted to apply pressure but was not strong enough to cause any harm to the bald man. After a brief struggle, the bald man freed himself and grabbed the lanky man by the throat with his large ham fists. The lanky man tried to break loose of the grip, but the bald man simply squeezed harder. Eventually, the lanky man went limp, and the bald man released him. The crowd roared. Those who won on their bets cheered, while those who lost cursed their luck. Izuku wished he had brought his notebook. There were so many different quirks in the room that his analytical mind was buzzing with information. After a moment, he turned to see that Bruce was no longer standing next to him. Instead, he was leaning over a large folding table, speaking with two nasty-looking men behind it. Bruce gestured over to Izuku, and one of the men simply laughed. After a minute of talking, Bruce handed the men a large stack of money, and they simply nodded. Bruce walked back to Izuku. "You're fighting next," he said simply. Izuku felt his stomach twist. He didn't realize he was going to be fighting so soon. Bruce must have sensed this because he placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Every chain has a weak link," he said. "Find it and exploit it." Without another word, Bruce pushed him into the ring. A fat man with a red face stood in the middle of the ring, a microphone in his hand. "Place your bets for the next fight," he shouted. His speech was slurred, and it was obvious that he had been drinking. Returning for his 10th match, the 7-3 win contender, give it up for Roadkill. Izuku's opponent stood opposite of him. The crowd erupted in applause as Izuku began to study him. He was a tall, scrappy-looking man, heavily muscled with a scarred, weasel-like face that was twisted into sneering glare, which he directed at Izuku. His hands were covered in white tape wrap that stopped at his knuckles, which looked 3 times as large as normal. Izuku assumed that this must be his quirk and made a mental note to avoid his fists as much as possible. And making his underground debut, shouted the drunk man. "And will undoubtedly be his last time in the ring, give it up for Deathwish." There was barely a reaction from the gathering crowd. Some people cheered, others booed and shouted in protest, demanding they show a real fight. Izuku simply raised his fists in a fighting-ready stance, his legs visibly shaking underneath him, trying desperately to bury his fear. The bell rang. Roadkill wasted no time. He charged at Izuku, his large knuckled fists raised in attack and shouting like a lunatic. Izuku felt his fighting instincts kick in and began to dodge the incoming barrage of punches, one after the other. Roadkill swung his fist at Izuku's head for a haymaker, which Izuku ducked under. This was what Roadkill was apparently hoping for, and thrust his knee into Izuku's chin, knocking him backward. The crowd cheered as Izuku fell on his back, clutching his face. Roadkill raised his hands, gloating and soaking in the praise from the crowd. He turned back to Izuku, spitting on him as he lay there. Izuku gradually pulled his hands away from his face, and anyone looking at him saw that he no longer looked like the scared boy from 30 seconds ago. As a matter of fact, he looked pissed. He looked really pissed. Rolling back onto his hands, he leaped to his feet in an instant. The sudden movement took his opponent by surprise and attempted to advance on him. But this time, Izuku was ready, easily evading the oncoming haymaker and grabbing Roadkill by the arm, throwing him into the hard cement. Roadkill lay there for a minute, the wind knocked out of him. Then, in a flash, he took Izuku off his feet with a sweeping kick. He rolled on top of Izuku and began laying blows on top of him, trying to beat him into submission. After a couple of blows, Izuku caught Roadkill's fists, pulling him into a headbutt that connected with his nose. Roadkill howled in pain as he grasped at his face, blood oozing from beneath his fingers. Izuku didn't waste his chance. He began to lay down an immense barrage of punches and kicks, to which Roadkill was helpless to defend against. His punishment came to an end as Izuku threw his enemy to the ground again. But this time, he didn't release his arm. Instead, he stomped his boot into the shoulder of his opponent, and with a sharp twist, heard the satisfying snap of Roadkill's arm breaking. Roadkill screamed before rolling over and passing out from the pain. The bell rang again. Izuku was the victor. The crowd was in an uproar. Izuku was placed on the low end of the betting odds. A few people were celebrating their winnings, while most were shouting that they had been hustled. One man stood in anger, pushing his way through the crowd. "That fight was fixed," he shouted. "No way this punk-ass beat Roadkill." Tearing off his shirt, he lifted his fists to fight. "You and me, bitch. Let's go." Izuku looked at Bruce, who nodded, a slight smile on his gaunt face. Izuku raised his fists and couldn't suppress a smile of his own. As the hours passed, Izuku continued to put down contender after contender. The crowd around him had cheered. All trepidation or prejudice towards Izuku was gone. Their chants could be heard in unison over the cheers, "Death wish, death wish, death wish." Exhausted and aching, Izuku stumbled back to Bruce, who placed his hand on his shoulder with an approving look. "Now," said Bruce, "you're ready for UA. UA High." "Good morning, everyone." Principal Nezu greeted his staff cheerfully. One by one, the teachers of the UA Hero course piled into the conference room. For each seat, there was a large manila envelope on the U-shaped desk in front of them. As you know, this meeting is to review the new applicants for the hero course. "We have a good lineup this year," said Midnight, the R-rated hero, sifting through the dossier. "Lots of powerful quirks." "Indeed," agreed Nezu. "However, as well as a few with some special recommendations from active heroes. But if you would turn to page 15, you'll see that one stands out in particular." All Might had finally found his seat, one of the last to sit down. He was in his depowered form, and didn't like to call attention to himself, so he entered the room last. Upon sitting down, he complied and sifted to the page specified by the principal. Upon finding it, however, he let out a sudden, violent cough, causing all the staff to turn and look in his direction. "Everything all right, Toshinori?" said the principal, still in his cheerful tone. Yes sir, everything is fine," said All Might, wiping the blood from his mouth with a handkerchief. Looking over the file he was holding, he could hardly believe his eyes. "It's the kid," thought All Might. From the rooftop, recalling that day brought back painful memories. He had replayed the conversation they had in his head when he had returned home and felt that perhaps he was too blunt with the boy. He wanted to offer some form of encouragement before he left the rooftop, but instead felt as though he had made things worse. In the end, he realized that it couldn't be helped, and it was better that someone had told him now before he got himself killed. But the boy had apparently not heeded his advice. "Izukumidoriya," said Nezu, reading from the file. "He will be the first student to take the UA entrance exam without a quirk." The atmosphere around the room changed abruptly. "Are you serious?" said Vlad King, the blood hero. "Does he have some sort of a death wish?" "I agree," said Midnight. "This year's exam is the hardest one yet. We can't in good conscience let him attempt it. He's only going to get himself hurt. And even if he did pass the exam," chimed in Cementos, "he'll have a near impossible time keeping up with the material and the other students." "I understand your concerns," said Nezu, attempting to quiet the room, "but they are all unfounded. I don't believe that Midoriya will have any trouble with the exam or the material here at UA. In fact, I firmly believe that he will be an excellent addition to the hero course." "Forgive me, sir," said Snipe, the cowboy-like hero, "but what makes you so sure?" "Because he's being sponsored by Batman." All Might had to stifle another cough. He and all the other teachers turned to the source of the voice. Shouta Aizawa, hero name Eraserhead, didn't look up from the dossier when he spoke, still looking through the file on Midoriya. "Wayne is sponsoring a student," said Vlad, rolling his eyes. "Is this just some sort of fundraising gimmick?" Hardly, said Aizawa coolly. If any of you read through the file, you'll see he is not only sponsored by our largest benefactor, but he was personally trained by him as well. Aptitude in multiple martial arts, various weapons expertise, advanced technical knowledge, demolitions experience, as well as experience in combat and search and rescue operations. He moved his finger down the paper as he read off the list. This is a list of all the material that was taught to Midoriya over the span of only 9 months. All Might began sifting through his own file of Midoriya. There it was, in black and white. Midoriya was Batman's new protege. The teachers all began chattering amongst each other. All that in only 9 months. I don't believe it. You'd have to be some sort of genius. But it is Batman we're talking about here. It's hard to swallow, said Present Mike, the DJ hero. I've heard talk of him, but never met the Bat in the flesh. Is it true what they say about him? There are many things that are said about him, said Aizawa. That is the very reason that he is so feared in the criminal underground in America. Here is what we know. As UAS largest private benefactor, Bruce Wayne's donations through the Martha Wayne Foundation account for nearly 40% of UAS funding alone. That equates to billions every year. He's been a hero longer than any of us here and is a founding member of the Justice League of America, the top hero agency in the West. He funds his hero work entirely out of his own pocket and chooses to stay out of the spotlight on principle, preferring to operate from the shadows through espionage and subterfuge. Despite this, he has been credited with taking down some of the most dangerous villains and criminals in the world. He is one of the most brilliant tacticians and if not the most dangerous man on the face of the planet, as quoted from Superman himself. Sounds like you're in love, Shouta, said Midnight playfully. Aizawa scowled. I simply admire his methods. I don't, said All Might. Everyone looked at him, surprised, as if they had forgotten he was there. I beg your pardon, said Aizawa. I don't approve of his methods, repeated All Might. He's a violent, unlicensed vigilante brute. His methods of hero work rely heavily on fear and excessive force, constantly leaving criminals with severe and sometimes permanent injuries, the lucky ones only suffering broken bones and missing teeth. He has no respect for and completely thumbs his nose at modern heroes and their work. You've met him? Asked Snipe. Once, when I was training in America, All Might shuddered, despite himself. If you ask me, he's only one step up from a villain. But wait, said Midnight. If he's not licensed, how is he able to perform hero work? That's illegal. Not for him, technically, replied Aizawa. As you know, since the introduction of the Rhode Island New State Statute, and the laws following its introduction, it is illegal for unlicensed individuals to use their quirks openly in public. But as Batman, the law does not apply as he operates without the use of a quirk. You mean he doesn't use his quirk for hero work? Said Vlad King, surprised. I'm saying he doesn't have a quirk, said Aizawa. The room went silent. All Might stared at the floor, averting any wandering eyes. It was true. All Might had only met Batman once before during his training years. David Shield, who supplied his costumes and support equipment, had to travel to Gotham in order to meet with Lucius Fox, the CEO of Wayne Industries, one of the vendors for David's support company. All Might had accompanied him, eager to see more of the United States. Gotham was a far cry different from California, where he had come from. It was darker, grungier, and much more dangerous. On the way to the meeting, a large explosion a few blocks away had drawn their attention, so All Might and Dave went to investigate. Running ahead of Dave, All Might had arrived at the site of the explosion, Gotham Bank, and had come face to face with what he assumed was a black-clad, pointy-eared villain, and didn't hesitate to attack, and much to his embarrassment, was quickly subdued. It wasn't until Dave had caught up to him and informed him of who he was fighting did All Might realize his mistake. But considering how soundly and ruthlessly he was taken down by Batman, he wasn't entirely sorry for it. More than once All Might wanted to chalk it up his defeat to inexperience, but he couldn't deny that Batman knew exactly how to take him down, and in mere seconds. He was as good as his reputation preceded him to be. And throughout the years, he had learned more about Batman and hero career. It was a vicious torrent of pain, death, and destruction. He had the largest rogues gallery of anyone he had ever seen, and was even responsible for the creation of some of his more dangerous enemies. He was even more shocked to learn that Batman had even taken on disciples, training them to be as ruthless and dangerous as he was. And now, Midoriya was his next victim. It's clear that despite not having a quirk, Midoriya is a strong candidate for enrollment, said Nezu. UA has always been a progressive school, one that looks forward into the future, not backwards into tradition. It was decided that the removal of the quirk requirement as a condition for matriculation in the hero course would open new avenues for an underserved minority. As a representative of that minority, we would be remiss if we did not give Midoriya that same opportunity. All the teachers nodded in consensus and continued with the meeting. It was all so confusing. Batman was training the boy to be a hero, the same kid who All Might told couldn't be a hero without a quirk. This was more than a big coincidence, and All Might didn't believe in coincidences. In any case, he was very interested to see Midoriya's performance in the entrance exam. He only hoped that he didn't get hurt. It was the day before the UA entrance exam. Under the tutelage of Batman, the past 9 months seemed to breeze by. Izuku had gained a lot more confidence in himself and his abilities, especially after his performance in the underground. He observed himself in the mirror yesterday and was amazed to see how much he had grown physically. His once weak and skinny body was replaced by a larger, muscular frame. He wasn't same quirkless weakling he was 9 months ago. But all his hopes and dreams were riding on this exam, and he had never felt more nervous in his life. While Bruce was sponsoring Izuku for UA, he informed Izuku early on that he was still going to take the entrance exam. The exam is a culmination of all that you have learned up to now, he had told Izuku. Unless they see for their own eyes what you can do, they will doubt your ability to be a hero. Izuku agreed with Bruce. He knew that if he got in on recommendation alone, without having a flashy quirk to show for it, he would be looked down on as to having attended UA without having earned it. He wanted to show everyone that he deserved to be there just as much as the rest of them. But that didn't alleviate any of the fear he felt. Arriving at the warehouse that day, Izuku was met by Bruce leaning over a table with 5 items atop it: a grapple gun, a pack of batarangs, a pair of combat gloves, and a small canister of explosive gel. "Midoriya," said Bruce, nodding in Izuku's direction. This was Bruce's customary greeting. "The entrance exam is tomorrow. You've exceeded my expectations during your training, but don't let that go to your head. You have a lot more to learn, and time was short, so we had to cut a few corners." Izuku nodded. He amazed himself at how much he had learned already, but knew that it only scratched the surface of what Batman had to teach him. "The UA review board for the hero course," continued Bruce, "allows students to use support items should it be deemed necessary. This is usually done on a case-by-case basis and varies depending on the student's abilities. Seeing as how you do not have a quirk, you have been permitted to use support items of your own." Izuku didn't answer. He had mixed feelings about this. On one hand, he was relieved that he could use the items that he had grown so accustomed to using, as it would greatly increase his chances of success in the exam. On the other hand, it felt as if he was being given a handicap, and that rubbed him the wrong way. Once again, he was being singled out for his perceived lack of ability. Bruce seemed to have read his mind. "Your goal in the exam," he said, "is not just to pass. You are going to show everyone that there is more to you than just being quirkless. Your strength and abilities come from you, not from powers, gadgets, or trickery. Which is why," Bruce added, gesturing to the items on the table, "you will go into the exam using only these items. As you can see, they are not an inexhaustible supply, the same as it would be in the field. You will have to make your use of these items count. This will also teach you to be adaptive, to utilize your surroundings to turn the tide in your favor." The way Bruce was describing it to Izuku made it sound like just another training exercise. In a way, it helped ease Izuku's anxiety a little. "Come with me," Bruce said suddenly, walking away from the arsenal table. He was taking Izuku out of the warehouse. They made the same ascent as it had so many times before, after each training session with Bruce. But this time, it continued to rise past the top office where he customarily got out. Izuku wasn't aware that there was a floor above Bruce's office, but remained silent as the elevator ride continued. The elevator opened to a large penthouse greeting room. Like Bruce's office, it was lavish, but sparsely decorated with simple black leather furniture, an office table, and a hallway which Izuku assumed led to Bruce and Alfred's quarters. A few paintings hung on the wall, and several pillars were erected throughout the penthouse, each holding a statue or other eclectic art piece. Alfred was waiting for them as they approached. He was wearing his usual suit, this time without the coat, swapping it out for a black apron. He smiled as Izuku and Bruce approached. "Master Bruce," he said. "Master Midoriya. Through with your training early, I see." "Splendid. I have just put on a pot of tea and have prepared dinner." "That's not necessary," began Izuku. He always felt uncomfortable when Alfred waited on him. He wasn't used to being pampered, having grown up in a middle-class home. "Nonsense, Master Midoriya," said Alfred. "Tomorrow is a big day, and you need a full belly and a good night's sleep for optimal performance." Smiling, Izuku relented. If there was one thing that he knew about Alfred, when it came to taking care of others, he was as stubborn as Batman himself. Izuku stood at the gate of UA High School, trying to steady his breath. He had not gotten a wink of sleep the night before, his nerves being the worst they have ever been. Instead, he had spent most of the night researching his competition. UA had some strong network security and detection software in their systems, so Izuku knew it would have been fruitless to try and hack their databases. The educational division of the government, however, was very lacking compared to UAS. They kept a list of all the schools in the district, and Izuku was able to find the file of new applicants to the UA Hero course filed by the administration. There were a lot of applicants, and they all had powerful quirks. Izuku knew that he had his work cut out for him. Izuku absently adjusted the belt on his school uniform. His utility belt was in his backpack with his training suit. Throughout his training, Bruce had always ordered Izuku to keep his utility belt within reach. He had grown so accustomed to it that he felt naked without it around his waist. Steeling himself, he took his first step towards the school entrance when Izuku turned to see a flash of brown and pink rush towards him. He braced himself, as it looked like she was about to hug him, but she stopped short before reaching him. Her face was beaming with excitement. "I wasn't sure you would be here," she said happily. "I'm so excited, I could barely sleep last night. How about you?" "Oh, I slept all right," Izuku lied. Despite the fact that they had developed a good friendship over the months, Izuku didn't have much experience talking with or being around girls and couldn't help but feel nervous around Uraraka. After catching up for a bit, they both proceeded towards the entrance to UA. "Deku," said Uraraka after a moment of silence. "Are you scared at all?" "For the test?" asked Izuku. "No," Uraraka twiddled her fingers absently. "About being a hero? What do you mean?" "It's just..." Her eyes fell to her twiddling fingers, avoiding Izuku's gaze. "I have a lot riding on this. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't make it as a hero?" She turned her face away. "What if I fail? What if I let everyone down?" Izuku was surprised. Uraraka talked about her dreams of being a hero often. She was passionate and driven and had a strong desire to help those who couldn't help themselves. She worked hard to develop her quirk and had developed many talents to supplement the strength of her quirk. Izuku had no doubt that she would not only do well at UA but would also become a top-rate hero. He never thought that underneath all these amazing accomplishments lay a foundation of fear and doubt. Izuku sighed, looking at the imposing UA building before them. "I haven't been completely honest with you, Uraraka," Izuku said. She turned to look at Izuku, confused. "I haven't told you what my quirk is all this time because, well, I don't have one." Uraraka's eyes widened. "You don't?" she asked incredulously. "Nope," Izuku said. "When I found out that I wouldn't be getting a quirk, I was devastated. I wanted to be a hero all my life, and after hearing this news I thought my dreams of being a hero were over. Growing up, I used to get bullied a lot. They told me I would never amount to anything, that I was useless or weak. All because I was quirkless. I even got the chance to meet my hero from childhood," continued Izuku. "I idolized him. He was all that I wanted to be in a hero. I always told myself, when things got hard, if I could just talk to him, he would tell me there was hope. He would tell me that I could be a hero. But when I finally met him," Izuku clenched his fists tightly. "He didn't. He only said the same thing that everyone had told me my whole life. You can't be a hero without a quirk." "I'm so sorry," said Uraraka somberly. "Don't be," said Izuku. "Honestly, there was always that little voice inside me that agreed with them. For a while, I even began to feel that they were right all along. But someone found me and believed in me and taught me to believe in myself." Izuku smiled brightly at Uraraka. "I have worked so hard to get here, nothing is going to stop me now," he said. "And if a quirkless wonder like me can become a great hero, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll become a great hero, too. So, let's do our best today and show them what we're made of." Uraraka returned his smile in earnest, a newfound look of determination and pride in her face. Together, they marched through the large doors of UA High School, eager to face their destiny. "What's up, UA candidates? Thanks for tuning into me, your school DJ. Come on and let me hear ya." The auditorium was silent. President Mike thought that he could literally hear a pin drop. This group was a tough crowd. "Keepin' it mellow, huh?" he said, trying to recover. "That's fine, I'll skip straight to the main show. Let's talk about how this practical exam is going to go down. Okay, are you ready?" he shouted again, throwing his hands up into the air in true DJ fashion. More silence. Izuku himself was too starstruck to say a word. He listened to Present Mike's radio show every day of the week, often while he trained. All the UA teachers were pro-heroes, and Izuku was thrilled to be learning at the hands of legends such as Mike. "Like your application said," President Mike continued, "today you rockin' boys and girls will be out there conducting 10-minute mock battles in super hip urban settings." The screen behind him came to life and displayed the different instructions for them as Mike went over them. Izuku was immediately taking notes, muttering to himself. The practical exam was straightforward. There were 3 types of villain robots they would be fighting, each worth a different amount of points. The more robots failed, the higher their scores. The robots could either be destroyed or immobilized for points. Izuku already started formulating strategies in his head. "Excuse me, sir, but I have a question." A tall student wearing square glasses and a tan blazer immediately stood upright. "On the printout, you listed 4 types of villains, not 3. With all respect, if this is an error on official UA materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this won't do." Izuku had to suppress a laugh. He was right. UA is Japan's most notable school, so it wasn't surprising that students from a higher social standing would be here as well. But this student was on another level entirely. "Additionally, you with the unkempt hair," he said, pointing directly at Izuku. "Excuse me," said Izuku, raising an eyebrow. "You've been muttering this entire time," said the glasses student. "Stop that. If you can't bother to take this seriously, then leave. You're distracting the rest of us." The auditorium erupted in laughter. Izuku said nothing, his eyes narrowing. He recognized this student from the list of applicants. His name was Tenya Ida. His quirk gave him organic engine-like devices in his calves, allowing him to move at extreme speeds. He came from a very prestigious junior high school with top marks. He was a contender in every way. Tenya Ida, Izuku thought to himself. "I know I've heard the name Ida before." Izuku was brought back to reality when Present Mike continued his explanation. "The 4th villain type is worth 0 points, he said. "That guy's just an obstacle we'll be throwing in your way. It's not that it can't be beaten, there's just kinda no point." Ida thanked Present Mike and sat back down. Izuku returned to his notes. The exam was going to be tougher than he first anticipated. If he was going to stand out from students like Uraraka and Ida, he was going to have to show the administration, know everyone, what he was made of. For the first time since he got here, Izuku was actually excited to get started. The exam. Izuku rubbed his gloved hands together, trying to think about anything but the knot in his stomach. The group had dismissed from the auditorium to change and prepare for the practical exam. As they stood by the large gates outside the faux urban site of the exam, Izuku took the chance to size up his competition. Most of the students were wearing simple workout clothes. Some of the students had special gear that Izuku could only assume amplified their quirk in some way. He recognized some of them from the files he studied last night, such as Tenya Ida. They had strong quirks, and he knew they would pose the greatest competition. He was also searching for Uraraka. They had to separate to change out of their uniforms. He knew that she was placed in his same testing center as he was and wanted to make sure she was doing okay. Finally, he spotted her. She was doing breathing exercises, probably attempting to settle her nerves. As Izuku began to walk over to her, he felt a large hand placed on his shoulder, stopping him. Izuku turned to see Tenya standing over him. He was wearing what looked to be a blue cyclist suit. His expression was unchanged from the one he had during the presentation in the auditorium, stern and authoritative. He glanced up at Uraraka and then back to Izuku. "She looks like she's trying to focus on the trials ahead," he said. "What are you going to do? Distract her and ruin her chances of succeeding?" Izuku had had enough. He jerked his shoulder forward, removing Ida's hand, who widened his eyes in surprise. "Listen, friend," Izuku said sharply. "Get off me. Who do you think you are?" Ida placed his hands on his hips, looking offended. "Really now? There is no need to be so." "Shut up," Izuku interrupted. "You seem to think yourself an authority figure and have placed me in your crosshairs. But believe you me, friend, that is a bad move." Izuku turned his head away from Ida and spat on the ground. "I would think that the brother of Ingenium would have more class than this." Ida's face quickly turned from annoyance and offense to shock. How? Ida stuttered. "I've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to get here," said Izuku, ignoring the question. "Stay out of my way." "Now, see here," Ida began indignantly. As he did, a loud, booming voice drowned out his own. Present Mike was standing on top of the tall gates, waving his arms. "Right, let's start," he shouted. "Get moving. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, 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 listeners. You're wasting airtime here." Izuku didn't hesitate. As the group began to run, he pulled his grapple gun from his belt, glancing at Ida as he stood there. "Try to keep up, Speedy," he said. And with that, a cable exploded from the muzzle of the grapple gun and carried Izuku into the battlefield. The momentum from his grapple gun launched Izuku past its anchor point. Izuku flipped through the air, landing swiftly on his feet and into a sprint. His acrobatic training had paid off. In the distance he could hear explosions and other loud sounds. Students had already engaged the faux villains. He only had 10 minutes to score as many points as he could, and he couldn't waste time running aimlessly throughout the streets. He lifted his arm and grappled upwards towards a building rooftop. Once atop it, he surveyed his surroundings. Several robots were roaming the streets. By their movement, Izuku could see that they operated on some sort of a preset route. He surmised that they were programmed to follow this route and engage once their sensors picked up biosignatures, such as body heat. This gave Izuku an idea. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop, he proceeded in the opposite direction of the students and the robots they were fighting. As they were fighting from the ground, they could only assume that all the robots were gathered into their specific area. But Izuku saw that there were several untouched robots patrolling several clicks away from the commotion of the other applicants. It was time to make use of his equipment. Taking several batarangs from his belt, he began to set his trap. The robot continued to follow its preset algorithm, following the route that it was defined. As it lumbered along, a biosignature passed by its sensors, only long enough to get its interest. Tracking its movements, the robot followed it throughout the winding maze of the small city. After a few minutes, the biosignature came to a stop. The robot approached it, and its offensive programming took effect. Before it could attack, the biosignature seemed to take off directly upward and disappeared from the sensors. Attempting to find the signature, it identified several other robots gathered into the same area. Something flew into its field of vision and stuck to one of the other robots. Several small devices were lodged into the chassis and began to flash steadily, beeping as they flashed. The beeps grew quicker as the other robots approached. Izuku loomed over the site where he had lured the doomed robots. His plan had worked, and over 10 robots were destroyed. Calculating in his head, he estimated that he had at least 20 points. It had cost him, however, as he was now out of explosive batarangs. Grappling down to the explosion site, he began to sift through the wreckage. He noticed that these robots seemed to be solar-powered, as they didn't seem to have a fuel tank of any kind. Most of the robots were too wrecked to be of any use, but Izuku found some of them, though inactive, had most of their working parts. Target acquired. The metallic voices came from behind him. 3 robots began to advance on him. Absently, Izuku calculated that there were 7 points between them. In a flash, Izuku lifted a heavy jagged shard, the same length as his arm, that was once part of the chassis of one of the destroyed robots. Izuku took a deep breath and charged. He rammed the shard deep into the optical device that served as its eye. Logically, that had to be where the metal was weakest. Izuku's calculation was correct, as the robot powered down and fell backwards. 1 down. With all the strength he could muster, he ripped the shard from the robot and rammed it into the same spot of another robot as it approached him from behind. 2 down. The third robot advanced towards him. It would be upon him in seconds. Instinctively, Izuku hurled the shard like a javelin into the eye of the robot. It stumbled, but didn't fall, still advancing on Izuku. This one needs encouragement, thought Izuku. Running at full speed, he launched himself into a flying kick at the robot, connecting with the protruding end of the shard, ramming it further into the robot. Izuku heard the satisfying sound of its power failing, and the robot tipped over. Pausing only for a moment to catch his breath, Izuku raised his hand and grappled away. It was time to rejoin the group. All Might could hardly believe his eyes. He had lost sight of Midoriya for a moment when the exam started. He had pulled a device from his belt and it carried him out of view of the camera, ahead of the other students. After a few minutes of searching, hoping that he wasn't hurt too badly, he finally found him, and was at a complete loss for words at what he saw. Not only was Midoriya uninjured, he had destroyed several robots by luring them into a trap. When he was accosted by 3 more, he used the broken shards of one of the destroyed robots to take down the others. He acted without even flinching and moved at lightning speed. The kid's got skills, said Vlad King, nodding with approval. Using what you have on hand and thinking on your feet are important traits to be a hero. But he's using explosives from his belt, said Midnight. Should that even be allowed? Those sure I can take immense skill to use, said Aizawa. Especially so considering they are explosive. You shouldn't focus on the tools. Focus on how he uses the tools. All Might continued to watch as Midoriya paused for a moment. His mind began to race. Who was this kid? Certainly not the same skinny crybaby he met on that rooftop all those months ago. He's on the move again, said Snipe, as Midoriya disappeared from the screen. It looks like he's going to join the others. They're all doing well in their own rights, said Nezu. I'd say this year's applicants look promising. Midnight agreed. Well, there's still plenty of time before it's over, said Snipe. The real test is yet to come. And with that, Aizawa opened a small, see-through lid on the control panel in front of him and pressed the large red button it covered. Let's see how they react. The exam was utter pandemonium. Explosions, the sound of bending and tearing metal, rubble and debris everywhere, students arguing and shouting, and robot carcasses piled across the landscape. Izuku released the grapple from its anchor point and dropped to the ground, rolling as he landed to lessen the impact. He brushed himself off and readied himself to continue his crusade. The ground shook. Izuku paused, puzzled. The ground shook again. It shook a lot. Izuku wondered if they were experiencing an earthquake when he heard an explosion off in the distance behind him. He and the other students turned to see the source of the destruction. A large shadow dropped ominously over the applicants. It continued to grow until the sun was completely obstructed. Looming over them, grasping the side of the buildings in front of it as it hoisted itself towards their position, was the zero-point robot. You've got to be kidding me, thought Izuku. The zero-pointer was taller than the buildings around it. It tore into them as it tried to move through the small gaps between them. Debris and wreckage rained down upon them. The students panicked and ran as fast as they could in the opposite direction. Izuku noticed Ida run by, their eyes locking for a brief second as he passed. Izuku's first instinct was to get away. He could avoid the robot easily, and take out as many 1, 2 and 3-point robots along the way. As he prepared to run, however, he heard a loud yelp of pain behind him. It was a voice he recognized. The rubble from the damaged building that the zero-point robot had caused had fallen on Uraraka's legs, pinning her to the ground. She struggled to get up, trying to free herself from the wreckage. No, said Izuku, horrified. No, 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 no. Without a second thought, he sprinted as fast as he could towards Uraraka. He would not lose another friend. Not now, and not ever again. Uraraka. At the sound of his voice, Uraraka's head snapped in Izuku's direction. Deku, she shouted. I can't move my legs. I'm here, Izuku said. I'll help you. He strained as he tried to lift the wreckage off Uraraka. There was too much of it, and it was too heavy despite the strength Izuku had gained over the past 9 months. I can't lift it, Izuku said dismayed. He had to think fast. If he tried to pull Uraraka from the wreckage, he might injure her further. He looked back at the robot. I was approaching fast. It would be upon them in a matter of seconds. Izuku knew what he had to do. Uraraka, he shouted over the noise. Try and use your quirk on the rubble. I'm going to buy you some time. Without another word, he sprinted in the direction of the robot. Deku, wait, shouted Uraraka after him. Are you crazy? As he ran, Izuku was wondering the same thing. He had fought against plenty of robots during his training with Bruce, but never one of this size. He had no idea how he was going to slow it down, to say nothing about destroying it. He had to think, what would Bruce do in this situation? Thinking back to his training, an image of Bruce passed through his mind. Every armor has a chink in it, a weakness, he had said. Find that weakness and exploit it. No matter how small it is, it could be the difference between life and death. Find the chink in the armor. Izuku scanned the massive automaton as it destroyed more buildings in its path. His analytical mind was going a mile a minute. This was obviously the real point of the test, to see how they would react to a disaster situation. It didn't seem to have any weapons, but its immense size made up for that. The robot this size couldn't just rely on solar power. That's it. A secondary fuel source. Something other than or alongside solar power had to be used to power a robot that size. Nuclear power was too dangerous, and the administration wouldn't dare use it around students. No, it had to be something safe but powerful, such as a large diesel engine. The fuel port would be somewhere easily accessible for the engineer. Scanning the robot a second time, he saw it. On the right side of the robot's neck was a small access panel. Easily missed if you didn't know what you were looking for. It had to be it. Easily accessible with a direct line to the fuel tank, protected by the robot's chest armor. Raising his hand, he launched his grapple hook, which carried him quickly towards the top of the monster robot. The robot reacted, attempting to swat Izuku off like a fly, only missing him by a few feet. He could feel the force of the wind as it passed him. Izuku reached the neck of the robot. The access panel was locked. Izuku didn't have the time nor the tools to pick it. Taking out his explosive gel gun, he sprayed a small drop on the lock of the door, enough for a controlled explosion. Bracing himself, he pushed the detonator. With a loud pop, the access panel flew open. Just as he thought, it was the entry point for the fuel tank. There was no time to lose. Izuku emptied the entire canister of explosive gel into the entry point. Holding the detonator in hand, he readied himself. He only had one shot at this, so he had to make it count. He leaped from the robot and pressed the detonator. The explosion from the robot's neck knocked its head off balance, tilting it to one side. The students stopped in their tracks. "Look," shouted one student, pointing towards the top of the robot. Ida squinted and saw a small figure falling through the air. A second explosion erupted, larger than the last, and the force of the explosion threw the falling figure off balance and was now plummeting towards the ground at an alarming pace. Ida gasped as he realized what that figure was. "It's that kid," he shouted. The rest of the group gazed in awe and terror as the robot fell over backwards, more explosions erupting from its chest, and a few screamed as they saw Izuku tumble towards the earth. Izuku had been knocked aloft from the force of that second explosion. He was trying to steady himself long enough to find a place to shoot his grapple hook, but the ground was approaching fast. He had to be quick, or he might not. Something clasped hard around his forearm, stopping his fall short. He looked up to see he was being held by Uraraka, floating on the remains of a robot, straining immensely from his weight. "I've got you," she said. Izuku clasped her hand back and hoisted himself atop the robot. Uraraka placed her fingers together. "Release." The two of them dropped in a heap atop the wrecked robot. They simply stayed there for a moment, hardly daring to move. After a minute, Uraraka, unable to hold it anymore, wretched and vomited over the side of the robot. Coming back up for air, she looked weakly at Izuku. Then they both started to laugh. They laughed for a good minute before calming down. "You saved me, Uraraka," said Izuku. "I had to return the favor," said Uraraka, smiling and wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Thankfully, besides Uraraka spraining her ankle from the debris falling on her, neither of them were hurt. The students all ran and gathered around them, shouting and cheering as they stumbled off the robot. Even Ida had dropped his pretense and was clapping and cheering along with them. The control room was silent, visual shock on the teachers' faces. The silence was broken only by a small noise, the principal clearing his throat. "Well," said Nezu cheerfully, "is there any doubt about his ability now?" All Might couldn't even speak, his words failing him. After a minute or so, he finally regained his composure. "This kid," he said. "Who the hell is this kid?" So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.